Welcome to our first webinar for prayer letters, titled Writing Memorable Prayer Letters, Getting Read and Remembered. So that's really what it's all about when it comes to writing prayer letters, is getting people to actually read them and then have them retain that information, retain the stuff about your ministry. And so we have a good group of people here, both from North America and around the world. I think we have the continent of Africa. I don't know if we have any Asia representation. Then the time difference always is tough there. So that's why we are recording this. But I'm Josh Leo, Communications Manager for Resonate. I believe I've met most of you, but my department spends a lot of time putting together all the stuff that's on the web that goes out to donors in print, videos, and things like that. And we also read all your prayer letters. And I sit down with missionaries and I do prayer letter reviews, and I give them tips and tricks, and I do orientation as well. And so this is kind of an outgrowth of that. So let's just jump right in. Why do we communicate? So communication is not just about retaining support dollars. It's really an act of ministry. Maybe some of you have read the book by Henry Nouwen about the spirituality of fundraising. And so it's not just fundraising, but it's also just how we involve people in our ministry. So you're called to go, and other people are called to support. And by communicating with them, you're confirming their calling each time that you write or email or make a video or visit. And I like to use a little analogy when it comes to communication from the field, right? How do you think professional football players are paid? What's the source of revenue? And why do spectators go to the game? You can answer in the chat there if you want. How do you think that professional football players are paid? Where does the money come from? I'm going to wait until someone types. Bam, ticket sales. There you go. Thanks, Melissa. Ad revenue, sure. So would you pay for a game that you couldn't watch? So let's say they only told you the end score, right? Would you still go? My suspicion is the answer is no. No one wants to know the final score of the Super Bowl or the baseball game. It's the drama that happens and the fact that you can watch it take place, right? And so ticket sales, people want to be there. They want to see the game happen. And the same is true for ministry. People don't want to hear, the end list of numbers of how many people you've reached. They want to kind of see it all unroll. They want to be involved in the drama, in the struggles, in the victories. And how do we engage people in that? How do we do that for the ministry side of things? And that is through our communication. So our mission in communicating is keeping supporters informed about ministry, soliciting prayer so that they're not only supporting us with their financial gifts, but also in their prayers, that we are providing accountability as people in ministry. We said we were going to go do something, and we need to show that we are living up to what we promised we would be doing. We request financial support. That's a big, important part of my job, important part of your job too, I'm sure. And we mobilize more people into missions. This is something that I think we often forget about, but I think many people, when they think about their first interaction with missions, it's that missionary visiting them in church and hearing them talk about a foreign country or about someone that they, in their own community that they were working with, right? And they get inspired and can join in. And educating and supporting people about missions, showing people what missions can be, that it doesn't look the same in every context, that you can be a teacher, you can be a pastor, you can be a community development worker. And so we have that responsibility as people who are involved in ministry. So that is where all these sections fit in. We are going to talk first, because we're talking specifically about the prayer letter side of things, I want to talk about design. This is something that I really enjoy, something that I think is very important. And I want to give you some of the kind of tips and tricks to using design to improve the readability and the memorability of your prayer letters. So my recommendation for your prayer letter is one piece of paper with two sides. Two sides. I see plenty of people doing one side, or I see sometimes people doing like 4 pages. And I think one piece of paper, two sides is perfect for a number of reasons. One, it's a good length. People don't have a lot of time, but they have enough time to probably read one sheet of paper, right? It's enough space to include some photos and some content. It is easily printed off. Even, it saves money. If you add another page in this, that's a whole nother piece of paper, more ink, one piece of paper. And I would say the first step in how you put together that one piece of paper is to start with a header. Now I have a poll here. I have a question. Oh, you know what? I forgot my first poll. I am going to start polling you right now. Go ahead and answer, all 16 of you. Hi, Jordan, Anna, Pablo, welcome. How do you feel? How confident are you in your prayer letters? Feeling really good? Maybe not so good? Maybe you don't even know what to do? I'll wait until that poll, all the results are in. We got 11, 5 more to go. It's okay, be honest. We're all here. This is not something that comes to everyone naturally. It's actually something that takes a lot of practice. All right, we got 13 responses. I am going to close this poll now. All right, seems like people are not bad. They're just looking to brush up on things, right? Well, I do think that that is a good place to be, and I hope you do get something out of this webinar as well. I have another poll that I want to share with you. And do you have a graphic header for your prayer letter? When you put together your PDF or your email or something, do you have a little header that looks maybe something like these examples here in this slide? All right, we have 12 people, 13 people saying yes, they do have something like that, and 2 who don't. All right, well, I think we know what we need to do next then. All right, so graphic headers are a great way to kind of immediately catch people's attention. They start people understanding a little bit about your ministry. They kind of solidify a brand for your ministry so that when they're going through their emails, they immediately can look at something and say like, oh, I know that's from Justin Van Zee. I wonder what he's up to, right? And so that example there of Justin Van Zee, it's got a little bit of, famous Cambodian landmark. It's got his name right there. It doesn't have even a fancy name or anything like that, right? But it draws attention. It establishes a color scheme, things like that, that start to make people familiar with that ministry. And so that when they see it either in their church, newsletter or something like that, or emails that come through, they immediately remember, and it triggers something in their brain that helps them recollect who you are and what you're doing. The next step after we get from headers is to move on to sidebars and columns. Now, sidebars and columns are really useful for readability. Now, I want to talk a little bit, and you can see in this template example, we have 4 different templates, Resonate templates. If you have trouble making your own, you can also customize these. I can customize them for you. If you have any questions along those lines, our team is here to serve you in helping you make an awesome template. I recommend using Publisher because it's just kind of easier to move stuff around. When you use Word, stuff sometimes just jumps all over the place and it gets really difficult. So sidebars and columns. If you look at these 2 examples, they're 2 columns, but they're different. One on the left, it's pretty much the same content. I think the right one is just maybe a little bit shorter. We got a small font size. On the left, it's very dense and there's no paragraph breaks, right? On the right side, we have 1.5 font spacing, so line spacing. And this is what I'd recommend, 1.5 line spacing. It gives your brain enough visual white space to actually follow the lines there. 2, break up your paragraphs and make sure that there's space between those paragraphs so people know how to jump around on those. And the other thing is using a font size, probably no smaller than 11 point font size, because for many people we have older supporters, people in churches whose eyes maybe strain a little bit when the font gets a little bit too small. And we want to make sure that they're able to read it, because oftentimes those people are some of the most ardent supporters of ministry. And so when it comes to columns, you can look at the top example there. And if you follow your line, the first line all the way, and you read it to one side, once you hit that last word against, your eyes got to jump all the way back to the next line. And sometimes if you read something that flows across the whole width of the page with no column, it's very easy to get lost. Your place, and just it's harder to read, to scan. If you look at these 3 columns here, it's just easier on the eyes. The line width is shorter, and so it makes skimming across that content a lot easier. So highly recommend columns. And you can see in this example here, columns don't have to be, 4 columns on one sheet of paper. They can be 3 width. It can even have this example on the front there where it's just a sidebar and a column. But the full width of the page is really too big for reading documents, easily at least. So chunking. Now, this is not, some strange new fad. It's just a easy way to visually break up content. If you look at that first example there, the phone number, we do this all the time. We add those little dashes between phone numbers just to make it more memorable, right? More easy to process in our brain. You think area code, first 3, and then the next 4, right? And it's much easier to read because it's broken up into chunks. We do this in prayer letters by adding subheadings. So let's say you're writing a big paragraph, and we do this in our newsletters as well. If you pick up a copy of Echoes, which I believe you should be receiving, we really try to break up those stories, the sections of a story, by kind of little subheads that give you a taste of what that next 2 paragraphs are going to be about. The other way that you can use chunking for improving readability is through little boxes, smaller sections of content. So that's a sidebar, that might be a little call out box, it might be a photo and a caption, and then also bulleted lists. It kind of just breaks it out of the normal paragraph structure that improves readability. So these are all design concepts that really improve the way that eyes go through documents. And so there's been a lot of research done about how people read, especially on the web. And so I call it scanning, skimming, and scrutinizing. So for the most part, people, especially, given their busy schedules, if they're just receiving your prayer letter in an email, then it's going to be something that they, quick scan through and maybe don't pay much attention to. The things that they might pay attention to, you can look at this example here. People look at headlines. They look at maybe the first bulleted text there, look at a little call out box up on the right-hand side. But for the most part, you can see the F-shape reading pattern. And this is consistent across the web and documents. People read in an F shape. They start at the top, look at various things that catch their eyes. And if there's, little boxes, call out photos, things like that, that's what people are going to be able to scan and just get. So you want to be able to make sure that your content, that your prayer letter is scannable, so that you have a photo, that you have that header so that they can see, oh, who is this from? So they might not read the whole thing, but they'll at least know that their church has a missionary in Haiti or something like that, right? The next level is skimming. This is a little bit more time, a little bit more in-depth reading. They might read the first sentence of a paragraph. They might read your bullet points. They might probably have done the scanning of the photos and other things like that. Maybe read your prayer requests. And for the most part, this is how your content's going to be read by the majority of people. I know it's kind of disappointing when you put so much time into things, but your average congregation member, even your friends, are getting lots of email from different companies, organizations, other people, right? And so they're not going to sit down like your grandma's gonna and read every single word that you have to write. That is scrutinizing, and I think it's kind of rare. And those are the people who are really dedicated to your ministry. They're going to read the whole thing back to front, and they're going to be able to repeat it to you. And hold on to those people and cherish them as much as you can, because they're few and far between, I think. So the key is really making your content scannable and skimmable, and making sure that for those scrutinizers that you're also keeping their attention as well and not boring them. Here's an example of a document that we're putting together these initiative sheets about the various things that Resonate is involved in. And this is about campus ministry. You can see that there. And if you just take a quick look at it, it tells you a little bit about the initiative, the type of ministry that goes on, mentions a little bit of financial need. But for the most part, it's not very skimmable, not very scannable. Let's improve that by adding a few of those design principles of using maybe some bolding, some sorry, I was reading the chat here. This is difficult to do, read chat and talk at the same time. So use some bolding, break out some things. If you look at this, we have a header now. So boom, you immediately know that when you pick up this document, it's about campus ministry, right? Further down the page, you have some bolding and an underline, and then some different colors of bolded bullet points, right? So immediately you're going to see campus ministry. Your eye's going to jump down to that bolded line and see engaging the entire university, building the church, promoting a reform worldview, cultivating missional leaders, and then you see the financial need there, right? But we can do better. Right now it might be a little scannable, but let's hit those skimmers. So we throw in a photo. We break out some of those sections into colored boxes. And right now, if you look at it, your eye kind of follows. Okay, you look at the top, you look at campus ministry, you go down to the photo, follow that down, and your eyes start reading Christian Reformed Campus Ministries. And you might read the first few sentences of those two paragraphs there, jump on over to the right-hand side, and start gathering information from those call-out boxes there. So this is what I mean by chunking, by using columns, by using those bulleted lists and things like that. And you can see we're using the Resonate brand colors, and I think that helps that helps the readability of it, and it also just makes it more memorable, easier to read, right? So when it comes to email design, and I'm going to ask you a question here about email. Are you making a print document? So I'm talking like a PDF or a Word document as your prayer letter, or are you only doing email, like so MailChimp or something like that, right? If you're doing both, then say yes. If you're only doing a PDF, then say yes. But if you're only doing an email, say no, only an email. All right, looks like the majority of you are making PDFs, and I think that's really good strategy, because in this day and age, we really have to meet people where they're at, and PDFs are viewable on a computer, but they're also really make it easy to print, right? So that one page front and back, if a church decides that they're going to print off all the prayer letters and copy them for all the members in their church, it's going to be a lot easier if they're on a single sheet of paper and distribute those. If you have friends back home who are maybe printing off your content and mailing it to people via the postal service, then it's going to be a lot easier if it's on a single sheet of paper. MailChimp and other email clients like that, often they don't make for easy printing. They're really great to read on a phone, really skimmable, links work and all that other stuff like that. So I recommend that we do them, but my recommendation is that we do both. And for missionaries that I've worked with in the past, the way that I recommend to figure out how much content to write is by saying, okay, put together that PDF, right, front and back, and then copy and paste all that content into your email. And it usually ends up being a really good amount of content. It's not too much, not too little. And it's got photos. You use a little call out box for prayer requests and things like that. And it just ends up working really nicely. So I recommend in those systems like MailChimp, MailerLite, Constant Contact, they all have templates usually that are pre-made. And even these basic ones where it just comes with structure, I recommend using those because then you can customize them with your own kind of branded header and things like that. I recommend single column because people are used to scrolling online, especially with phones. You just keep on going, and you don't need to worry so much about the columns because sometimes those columns end up being really uneven or they don't translate well. They oftentimes will be too thin, and so the single column makes for much more easy skimming in that F shape pattern that we looked at earlier. It's also a lot quicker to put together. If you just have content block, content block, content block, you just copy and paste each section, create a new content block, and it comes together really quickly if you've put the work into your PDF. You can see in this example from UCLA, they go with a single column view with different content blocks. This is kind of their brand standards for emails coming from UCLA, right? And I want to share a little bit of example here of one of our ministry prayer letters, or I guess it's for churches, it's a newsletter, email newsletter that we send out to churches, right? It's got a single column, so you have a nice header here that's consistent, so you know what this is, who it's from. You have the date very clearly articulated, and then you have a nice eye-catching photo with titles here. Now these link to larger articles that we've put together, but for you can just put your content right in here and it works. I like using these little kind of call out boxes if you have other things that you want to draw attention to break up maybe different sections or different articles. And then you'll see here, these aren't quite columns, but we do have images that kind of have a corresponding smaller content. So little updates and news things. Maybe these would be family updates or saying, hey, I'm going to be on home service soon and we're going to be visiting churches, and you have a picture of a church or something like that, right? Or a little box near the bottom of bulleted prayer requests, things like that. Really easy to scroll through, really easy to put together. And what I recommend is once you do have that PDF, just put a button right here at the bottom that says download print version. And for those people who want to print it off and distribute it, they can just get that. So let's go back to our slides here. And don't forget to link to your donate page. So everyone who is in this webinar should probably have a donate page for their work. And if you don't, I mean, you have a page on the Resonate website, a lot of our people who are working overseas. And so we can also make a nice shortened version URL for you. So it would be resonateglobalmission.org/Rhoda or /boss, something like that, so that you don't have to put a big long link in your prayer letter or in your email, something like that. So if you want one of those created for you, just shoot us an email and we'll get that done for you. And we have just finished section 1. So I am going to open it up for any questions. I'm going to enable your microphones. And if you want to put something in the Q&A, go ahead. If you want to just speak up and ask a question that way, feel free. Any questions about design, layout, email? Wow, you guys got it all figured out. Okay, Adriana has a question. Let's see here. Lisa Newman, okay. Let's see, maybe we can go like this. Try to click on your microphone there. Oh, we have what would be a good font type? Font, I would say if you're putting together a print document, is basically fonts with feet, and go with traditional, things like Times New Roman are actually really easy to read. They say that for the web, using sans serif, so without the feet, work better. They're more readable online, and serif fonts are more readable in print. So that's one of those tough things, depending on how it's going to be read. I think it's more important that you have the good line spacing, that your font size is not too small. So nothing smaller than 11 is really important.
Josh, can you hear me?
Oh yeah. Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. I found the mic on button.
Awesome.
I was wondering, this might be a whole nother can of worms. I don't know how many people this affects who are in this webinar right now. But how do you suggest approaching branding for partner missionaries? Our primary sender is another organization, and we really only have probably about half of our church are Christian Reformed, but probably only a very small handful of our supporters are giving through Resonate. So how do we deal with those branding issues? What do you recommend?
Well, I think, depending on, I think it's good to have a primary place where you're going to be processing donations through, whether that's Resonate or your other agency. Pick one and direct people there, right? If there's a better policy for, fees or something like that, choose the one with a better policy. When it comes to actual documents, I would probably put on the bottom, maybe on the back page, on the footer or something like that, just throw both logos on there. Not too big, just, put them on there. And people understand that, we have partnership with many different organizations. And, I think that that's a good way to do it. And even in your emails, you can put links to both organizations, usually in the footer or something like that.
Yeah.
Karen has a question about people putting a PDF in email every time. Not everyone does. Some people just send emails. The way that I usually recommend it is put together a PDF every other month. And it does make putting together an email much quicker. like I said, the copy and paste, you just throw it in there, right? And so in those months that you're not writing, I just say, don't even go through MailChimp. Just send a nice little quick update with, a prayer request or something like that. But I do think that, like I said, meeting people where they're at, whether they're going to be printing it or reading it online, it's good to do things that way. So we have another question from Melissa. Do you know if MailChimp has an easy button option in the free version? I'm not exactly sure what you mean, an easy button option. So the free version does usually have all the same features as the paid version. It's just, list size and a few other things like that. And you can easily put buttons in there and link to files with those buttons. If that didn't answer your question, then let me know. Naji has a question. The Resonate style guide and things like that, right? And the prayer letter templates. If you go to resonateglobalmission.org/bank, that has everything you could need in terms of logos, templates, colors, fonts, Resonate fonts. It's all there. resonateglobalmission.org/bank. So yeah, it looks like Melissa, you might just have to do a little bit more digging, and Karen says maybe she could help you if you need any help. All right, we're gonna go
Josh?
through. Yes.
Quick question
Hey.
for you.
Sure.
The last example that you showed, you had all the pictures on one side and the text on the other.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever alternate pictures on one side, text on the other, and sort of zigzag it, or do you always keep it in one column?
We do zigzag it. I think as long as you're not kind of making too much of a snake that text is flowing through, like if you have one line, two pictures and then like one line of text flowing between the pictures and making people really kind of have to follow that, then it's a little bit more difficult. But if you have those nice chunks, it makes it very easily readable. Adriana, so to link a button for a printable PDF, do something on Publisher, export a PDF, save it on our computer, and then put it all in MailChimp and put a button that links to the document. Yes, so you export the PDF first, right? And from Publisher, once you've copied all that stuff into MailChimp, you have all your content and your pictures uploaded, then at the end, you just add a little button. You could also just do a regular linked text. You type in, download the printable version, and you link. Now, I believe in MailChimp, you should be able to link it to a web address, link it to an email, or link it to a file. And you can upload that PDF into MailChimp, and that'll host it. So it won't be an attachment in the email, but it will be basically a link to the PDF that they can then download. So that's how you would do it in something like MailChimp. For those of you that aren't using MailChimp, then I would just include it as an attachment. All right, we're going to keep on moving, and if we have more time for discussion at the end, we will do that. So I'm going to close your mics back down here and move on. All right. We have photography. The key to good photography is showing ministry happening. When it comes to prayer letter photography, you're writing about the stuff that's happening. And if you're not showing the stuff that's happening, then you're kind of doing a disservice, right? This is hey, I think that's Karen, isn't it? She's attending. And so that is a TLT training, and those people are praying over their action plans. And if you're writing about some training and you're saying these people prayed over the action plan, having a supporting story or supporting photo of that is really valuable. It adds a lot to your story. Conveying emotion, so not just blank faces, not just people sitting around in an office. But look at how that grandpa's looking at his little grandkid. Like, you can just feel the love there. You feel a sense of familiarity. You think about your own relationships when you're looking at that. So look for those photos, those moments where you can really capture some emotion. Go easy on the group shots. This is a picture of some of my coworkers even. They volunteered in Dominican Republic working on a church building. And, you know, the story is about building a church, but these people don't look like they're building a church, right? This is the picture you want to use when you talk about working alongside people in the Dominican Republic building a church, right? You can see the ladders, you see the buckets of mortar, you see both people from North America and the DR working together, right? It illustrates the actual action of the ministry that's happening. When you have a good photo, try to crop out the fluff. So this photo I look at and I'm kind of distracted by that juice box and the kind of sick looking kid in the front who's kind of blurry, right? Crop that out, and all of a sudden now people's attention is not on the juice box, but on those people praying, right? So the key is to look at your photos and say, okay, what am I really trying to communicate here with this photo? And am I doing that? Do I need to cut out some stuff? Respect the dignity of your subject. Here's two examples. This is from an organization called Team, and they had a nice little blog post about missions photography. And, you know, when we talk about people that we're working alongside, when we're working with, we want to think about how we represent them in photography. The first photo on the left doesn't look super happy, kind of, you know, depressing, kind of sad. Does that really capture who this woman is as you know her to be, right? Or is she more like the woman on the right, full of joy and smiles and greeting you every day when you pass by her shop, right? So make sure that when you're using photos, use photos that accurately represent those people and that they'd be proud to see as well. Basic photography tip is the rule of thirds. So you kind of make a tic-tac-toe board across your image and you put what's most pleasing on the lines and especially at the intersections of those lines, right? So right there you see the bee's eye. It for some reason, you don't want to put everything right in the center, but naturally our eyes are just gravitating towards those kind of asymmetrical elements. So they say, you know, like when you put together a bouquet of flowers, like always do odd numbers. Odd numbers look sort of better naturally to our eyes. Same goes for things. Don't put stuff right in the middle. Put it off to the side on a line. This applies to people and eye lines. So always put them on the lines, especially at the intersection of those lines. Makes the photos much more engaging. Also play with angles. You can see this little girl here. She's tiny. And if I was to take a picture of her, I'd probably be looking down at the top of her head. So the key is to get down to the level of your subject. If people are sitting, you sit down or you crouch down, right? If people are short, get down to their level. It just creates a sense of equality, a sense of, it's more engaging when you're actually at the eye level of the subject that you're photographing. Don't forget to take close-ups of things as well. Oftentimes we get lots of wide shots, but get the close-ups of the people that you're working with. You know, have a nice portrait of them if you're going to be talking about them. But don't forget the landscapes and cultural images and things like that too, right? Give a taste of the context in which you're working. If you're, you know, in Nicaragua, there's lush jungles sometimes of the year, right? There's volcanoes, there's little markets and fruits and other things like that that just aren't around in North America. What makes your context unique? Show that off too. Provides a sense of place. It grounds your content in a location when you include those kinds of images. Action, again, ministry, movement, laughter, the things that we're involved in require energy and people are naturally, they're not just always sitting and staring at you, right? You're doing stuff, so show that stuff that's being done. You can use group photos. I don't want to say that all group photos are bad, but I've definitely seen prayer letters where it's group photo, group photo, group photo, group photo, and they all just start to look the same after a while. So, if you're doing a training or meeting with a group of people, show it off, but also temper it with some of these other close-ups and landscapes and things like that. Look at the small details. So, I think like I went on a trip to Turkey, and one of the things that like sticks in my brain about Turkey is these little glasses of tea that are just everywhere, right? It's just such a cultural element that you have to have a picture of that little glass of tea. It's an important part of kind of the culture there, the way that people spend time and socialize and things like that, right? So take a picture of that. Don't just take a picture of a wide cafe, but get that close up to really illustrate some of those unique elements. Let's take a little break and we can talk about photos. If anyone has any questions about photos, feel free to ask now. Photography, good photography. The best camera to use is the one that you actually have on you. That's, I think the most important thing is that people get these big cameras, but unless you're actually carrying it around, it's kind of useless. Phones these days are amazing for taking photos, and I would highly recommend just using that. And if you're the one who's leading something, I would also recommend just passing the photo over or the camera over to someone else. To take a picture of you while you're leading. Thank you. Naji, I will answer your question later at the end here. Okay, so Adriana has a question of, what about the challenge of being the only person in the group in a prayer setting or something that feels intrusive to take pictures? How can we get action shots? Also, how outdated can the pictures be? I think that is a tough one, right? So you need to respect your host culture and the people around you. So you don't want to be obnoxious. I think through your relationships, you can get a pretty good grasp of how comfortable people are. And I think the most important thing is just ask if it's okay. And if people say, no, thank you, then don't. But for the most part, I do think people would probably say, yeah, okay. And just try to, step back. I mean, when our team goes out and does photography, you kind of just have to be bold sometimes, right? So if we're in a church service, everyone in that church service usually knows, the pastor usually says, hey, we're going to have some people here today who are going to be taking photos. And the church members know that. And so I'm so proud of Dale when he goes, walking through the aisle taking photos, because that's what he's there for. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do that every time that you're in church, but I think that you would be amazed at how forgiving people are to some of those photography moments. When it comes to how outdated the pictures can be, if it's a picture of a mountain, well, those last a lot longer than, if you're taking a picture of a kid and when he's 6 and now he's 14, don't use that photo. All right. Take photos. That's the biggest key. Yes. Take pictures. Just take as many as you can, because you can never go back and get them after the fact, right? So be there. Karen says she gives a spare camera to kids and teens, and they sometimes get a good one of her in action. So yeah, it's better to take a whole bunch and find the one good one than to only take one bad photo, right? Okay, let's move on to some examples here. So I don't want to take up too much time here, but here's some just examples of, it incorporates photography and the layout and design principles that we talked about, right? This prayer letter here, this is something that I actually see fairly often. The biggest problem is postage stamp size photos. You see that one on the left there? Like, I know this is a photocopy, right? But I think that's a group photo. And when you shrink a group photo down to the size of a postage stamp, it's really just a bunch of random little circles, brown circles usually. People's hair, people's heads, like you can't tell anything. So use the space to actually show off those photos. Here's a picture, or here's a prayer letter, and it has images. Wouldn't call them pictures though. Clip art is no substitute for actual photos of ministry, right? We have a number of group photos. I'd say too many group photos. It does have, it's using columns. It's got some call out sections there, but it's definitely a little overload on the group photo side of things. Here is a very heavily designed prayer letter, and it comes to the point where I can't imagine a church trying to print this off. They would use up all their ink in one printing because of so many colors, and the photos are still kind of small. They do have at least sections for the content there and the little boxes and things like that. But for the most part, simple and white is better than way too busy. Again, with the different fonts, too many different fonts. The key to using fonts is saying, okay, headings are going to be this color and this font. Body copy is going to be this font, and stick with it no matter what. Don't play with all different fonts, just saying I'm going to make my titles this and the rest of the content this, because that starts to create consistency. It helps people say, oh, I know what a title is, I know what the content is, and how to scan through your document. In something like this, 1, doesn't use columns, 2, pictures are too small, 3, way too many fonts and colors, and it's just really hard to follow through, right? So I would definitely recommend using those tips and tricks that we've mentioned before. Okay. Margaret has a question about how many photos would be suitable to add to one page. Make sure that they're big. I would say, like, on the front page, if you have a sidebar, in that example of our template, 1 nice big photo on the front is great, maybe 2. And then on the back, you don't want to have it be too many photos and not enough content, but depending on the size of your columns and things like that, 2 or 3 even on the back could work. But definitely, I'd say like at least 2 images per letter. All right, now we're going to get to content. This is probably the most important part, and I hope I gave myself enough time to go through it here. So obviously you can see this is about writing good. That's a little joke there, sorry. Does anyone know who this is? It's right down in the corner. This is Johanna Veenstra. She is the CRC's first overseas missionary. She started serving in 1919, so 100 years ago this year. She served for 13 years and died in the field in Nigeria. Her letters were published in the Banner, and she was kind of like the superstar of the CRC when it came to work overseas. And she really sparked a passion for mission in the CRC and recruited other people into mission. She actually put together a number of people, like a team there, who had a major impact in Nigeria. I'm sure some of our people who are in Nigeria can even talk with more authority about her legacy and things like that. So as we think about Johanna Veenstra, I want to ask you a question here. So there's another little poll. What is the best way to communicate information as we start thinking about content? Statistics, list, a story, or a report? Those are my questions right now. This is too easy, huh? All right, you're right. It's a story. The answer is a story. So, Johanna Veenstra, let's talk a little bit about how she wrote. Here's an example of something that she published in the Banner. the daughter of prayer. Today, I would like to introduce you to the first woman baptized in this district. Every rule is subject to changes, and with this woman, we departed from the written regulation that a candidate for baptism must be able to read the gospel and must have learned the first catechism of 100 questions and answers. I don't know if I could pass that test right now. Because she was well on in age, there were many white hairs on her face, was wrinkled with years. Her name is Pa'ana, and she is a widow. She earns her own living by buying foodstuff and selling it again at the market. So this goes on to talk about this woman and about how she has a passion for the Lord, and how even though she can't read in her old age, they believe that they can baptize her because of her her passion for the gospel. And you get those details about she has many white hairs and her face is wrinkled with ears. I love that. But also just the way that she introduces, I want to introduce you to someone. That's how she opens up her prayer letter here. Let's look at another example here. Just recently, we buried the oldest member of our little flock of Christians. He was an old blind man. During my last term, he would come on Sunday morning, sit outside the door of our mud chapel, and after service, we would give him 2 pennies from the collection plate. He was very grateful and was not like an ordinary beggar. Indeed, he had never asked for alms, but we gave to him regularly. Again, going on, introducing you to someone, but giving you little details about that mud chapel and pennies and things like that, right? Very engaging. Very, very, and this is, back in 1919. So the whole concept of writing prayer letters and getting, really engaged in the lives of people. It's how we get people to be excited about our ministries. So let's go on here. We need to be like Johanna. Johanna told stories. She grabbed your attention with those headlines. So I want to introduce you to someone. Or, here's another one I have here. And these are all Johanna's prayer letters that were published in the banner. And so this one is, dear friends, very often when a missionary speaks on the platform or when you read his or her messages in the paper, you notice they talk about problems and difficulties. I'm sure many people wonder what just kind of problems. So he jumps right into like problems and things like that, right? Very engaging. Johanna talked about people, as we saw in those 2 examples. She wrote regularly, just very consistently wrote to her supporters. She understood her audience very carefully and wrote to them personally. So she wrote, dear friends, she addressed people personally in everything she wrote. Also, she was very honest and vulnerable, like when she's writing about her problems here and some of the difficulties of doing work at that time, she's honest. And, it's not everything is success and easy. So one more question here. Before we talk about stories, I want to know, how comfortable do you feel about telling stories? So that stories are important, but do you think you are a natural storyteller? Do you take a little time, but you do it? You could, you say, okay, it's sometimes difficult. Or maybe, I feel like I don't have any stories at all. Which one? Where do you fall? All right. This one is a little bit more, we get a little bit more variation here. That's good. See, this is where I think the key is. So I have a little video that I want to share with you that I think gets at really the heart of why we talk about stories here. So I'm going to share that right now.
Once upon a time, information was scarce. So we made decisions based on the advice of experts, using them as North Stars for insights. Now, thanks to the internet, we can ourselves try and find our own answers to questions that plague us and find information to make informed decisions. But instead of finding clear answers, we often find noise. We're living in a world where we have too much information. And because of that, we're even more susceptible to great story. It's what helps us decide what to believe in. Stories are important because they're meaningful, and they're meaningful because they're memorable, impactful, and they personally connect. First, let's talk about memorability. Eugene O'Kelly was a CEO of a consulting company. He started having headaches. He was referred to a top neurosurgeon in New York, where he was diagnosed with late-stage brain cancer, and he was given 3 months to live. He started talking to his wife, how does he want to spend those 100 days? He was purposeful about who he spent time with and what stories to share with them. He also thought hard about what would be remembered in those last 100 days. He and his wife would live each day with a focus on finding perfect moments where time expands and when noise is separated from signal. All that exists is that single moment. And he found in those perfect moments, those were the most memorable stories that defined his life. In one study, researchers asked students to make a 1-minute persuasive pitch to other members in their class. And on average, a typical student used 2.5 statistics in their pitch. Only 1 in 10 told a story. 10 minutes later, the researcher asked everyone to pull out a sheet of paper and write down every single idea they remembered. Only 5% remembered any statistic. 63% of the students remembered the story. Stories are memorable in a way that statistics aren't. Now let me talk about impact. Research shows that individuals are more likely to buy from a person or an organization whose story they believe in and which resonates with them. In one study, Deb Small at the University of Pennsylvania and her colleagues wanted to determine how to best raise money for Save the Children, a charity focused on the well-being of children worldwide. They created 2 versions of a marketing pamphlet. The first version featured statistics about the magnitude of problems facing children in Africa. The second version also featured those statistics, but in addition provided information about Rokia, a 7-year-old girl from Mali, who faced the threat of severe hunger. The subjects were given $5 as compensation for the study, and before leaving, the researchers asked if they wanted to donate any money to the cause. The individuals in the story condition gave nearly twice as much money as those in the statistics condition. We used to think it was our rational brain that makes decisions. Now we know it's emotion driving decisions, and we rationalize the decision afterwards. Finally, I want to talk about personal connection. Research shows that if we present statistics to an audience, a certain part of the brain called the Broca's and Wernicke's area gets activated. So the language processing part of the brain is activated and we can understand but not feel. When a story is shared, the audience feels the story. Our whole brain is activated and meaning is extracted. The meaning of the story comes from the personal connection the audience feels when they're listening to the story. And when a story is well told, they're able to feel connected not just to the story, but to the storyteller. When most of us think of advocating for ideas, we go to statistics, we go to convincing arguments, facts, and figures. But studies show that if we share a story, people are more likely to remember the message, be persuaded by it, feel personally connected to it. And when data and stories are used together, audiences are moved both intellectually and emotionally. For lasting effect, you need to persuade the rational brain, but also resonate with the emotional brain. Recent behavioral research has shown why stories are so powerful. It's because they're meaningful. Those who tell the best stories will become the best leaders. If we consider the simple question, what is the story, or why am I doing this? We may find we make very different choices of how we spend our time. Isabel Allende once wrote, "Silence before being born, silence after death. Life is nothing but noise between those 2 unfathomable silences." But there is signal and there is noise. And how do we reduce the noise? Story.
This talks about how stories over anything else connect to people, and they affect the brain in a very unique way. They activate part of your brain that allows the listener to turn the story into their own ideas and experience, thanks to a process called neural coupling. Listeners not only experience similar brain activity to each other, but also to the speaker while you're telling a story, right? The brain releases dopamine into the system when it experiences an emotionally charged event, making it easier to remember and with greater accuracy. When processing facts, 2 areas of the brain are activated. And so if you activate, if you're talking about statistics and information, but then you're also engaging people's emotions, all of a sudden these connections make things much more memorable, much more engaging. Messages delivered as stories can be up to 22 times more memorable than just facts. So if you're not telling stories, you're not communicating as best as you can. Stories connect, they inspire, they illustrate, and stories are extremely memorable. They're the part of the sermon that you actually remember after the service is done. Jesus used parables. He told stories because the lessons are simple, the messages are simple. The story makes a simple message really memorable. And I think that recognize that people back home have an interest in far more than just a large meeting or a dramatic conversation. The differences of everyday life in the field where you serve sometimes can become commonplace, but it's those stories that really illustrate and make things memorable to people. So when we're talking about stories, we need to ask ourselves a few questions. And this is a good way to kind of say, okay, I don't have any stories, but what do I do? How do I find a story? And we're thinking, oftentimes we think of like, oh, that big conversion story, right? Like someone all of a sudden became a Christian because of something I did. All right. I want to make sure. Yep, I will make that video available. So no problem. So these are questions to ask yourself to help you tease out those stories, right? Whose life is different because of your ministry? This doesn't have to be a big conversion story, just a story of impact, right? So you think about like, what's different? We're not talking about like their entire life has been changed, right? We might think of, okay, so this person maybe didn't have that great of a relationship with their spouse, but after some counseling or through a Bible study or something like that, they've realized maybe they should try to help out at home a little bit more, right? That's a life change. If a relationship is impacted, that's a huge thing. And you can pull that out. So think about where are those differences, before and after, right? We all experience struggle. What struggles was this person going through that could be served by your ministry, right? So what are those difficult areas that you are trying to address in your ministry? How did you first get connected to this person? Do you have a first memory of them, or better yet, one that illustrates their life before any transformation, right? What makes this person unique from other people that you might be encountering on a daily basis? What makes their story a good representation of a wider issue that's maybe happening in the community, or a personal struggle that represents their context, right? What goals do they have for themselves? How have they articulated their desire for change? How are you helping them to achieve that goal? What tangible steps have you seen them make toward that goal? And then how can your supporters get involved? What can they pray for? What have their gifts already helped to achieve? What else can they give to in the future? All right. So here's just like 3 little examples, 1-sentence examples of a couple stories, right? Through a Resonate Bible study, Arnold learned a new way to read the Bible and has since felt a renewed passion for reading it himself and sharing what he's learned with others. So we're not talking about like dramatic, oh, I was once a drug addict and now I'm a pastor, right? Those stories happen, but not every day. But I would hope to see that in your ministry, you're working with people who are maybe, finding a new way to read the Bible, learning more about what it means to care for their community, learning how to be in relationship better, learning how to serve their congregation better. What are those little changes, right? Rosie was a regular attendee of a church, but never saw herself as a leader. But a missionary's mentorship and friendship helped Rosie see that she too could lead. So it's not always about, like us doing this dramatic thing to instill change. Sometimes it's people just kind of, walking alongside people as they're experiencing change. By the time she was in high school, Mira was beginning to question the Christian faith she grew up in. but hadn't thought critically about it. A Resonate teacher was able to discuss some of her questions with Mira, both during and after class. So you might not even have like a story that says, oh, now she's, a much stronger Christian, but just the fact that she was at a point where there was a lot of down and critical conversations happening, and how, you as a worker are involved in that. When we talk about writing a story, this is like, if you take like a creative writing course, this is kind of what we're going into now, right? The actual logistics of story writing. What's that hook? So Johanna Vinscher might say, I want to introduce you to someone. There's a really good one here by Dawn Mickelson, and she writes, no one will bury you when you die. That's the first line, right? That's what Gallo's neighbors told him when he refused to return to Islam. For Gallo, an almost blind 70-year-old man who is the only Jesus follower in his village, that is a serious threat. Who will bury me is a major barrier for Muslim thinking about leaving Islam to follow Jesus. So, I mean, that's really grabbing. Like, what's that hook, right? What's that first thing that you can really engage your readers in? Don't waste that first line. It might be the only thing that they read. So if you're going to write anything, at least make that first line really good, right? And then what we want to do is create some tension. What's the problem? What's the difficulty? What's the struggle that's happening in this story? If you're talking, any good story has some sort of conflict, some sort of tension. It's not enough to just have exposition and explanation. They need to be able to feel and kind of empathize with the subject of your story. Climax. So something happens. There's some sort of incident. There's some sort of conversation. There's some training. There's something that basically a hero and I don't like to use the word hero, but something happens that changes the direction of the narrative for your subject there. And so it's going to transform their life or experiences. Maybe this person or even God shows the protagonist that the things are different than they expected. And then the resolution is where we list the evidence, not just the hopes and plans, but like, how do we actually see the evidence of that transformation? So, if it's someone's relationship that all of a sudden he started doing the dishes where he, never helped out at home before or something like that, right? What are those little evidence, the baptisms, the profession of faith, community events that you can use to illustrate that transformation after that climax, right? And then finally, a call to action. If you're writing this, you want something to happen. And it might be something like, feel blessed to be part of our work, right? You're just trying to affirm the supporter's calling to support you. Sometimes it's, I need you to pray for this thing, or I need you to donate to this project, or I need you to feel affirmed that your donations are being used wisely, right? So when we write, we always need to write with an authentic voice. And I think that you are in a position right now, because when people read your prayer letters, it's a personal experience, right? So they know it's from you to them. And even if they know that it's going out to a bunch of people, they're still internally reading it as me. So use that word you. Write how you talk. Be on brand. When we talk about branding, who are you as a person? Are you don't try to sound like some sort of, theologian if you're not. If you don't in everyday conversation talk like that, just be authentically you, because that's why people are engaged in your ministry. Share your life and be honest about the things that are happening. Educate people about your country that you're working in, the type of ministry that you're involved in, the problems facing the people that you're working with, some of the struggles of your work, some of the issues that come up. Share your spiritual growth so you can actually not only be in ministry with the people that you're serving with locally, but also, expose people to some valuable lessons that God is teaching you and how they can kind of grow from that as well. And don't forget to communicate often. I recommend at least 4 times a year, but ideally at least every other month would be awesome. So in terms of finding those ideas find it to be helpful to, have a little notebook, something like that, even on your phone. If you have a little notes app or something like that, just write down ideas when they come, so that when it comes time to sit down and say, okay, what am I going to write about? It's much easier to have a nice little list of things that you've prepared, that as you're riding home from an event or something like that, you're saying, oh, that was a really interesting conversation I had. How can I'm going to write that down so I remember it for next time. And then when you do sit down and write first and edit later. So let that creativity just flow out of you when you're writing. Write more than one page, 2 sides, right? Just go for it. And then come back and edit it. And think of your audience. Who are those people? It's really helpful to think of an individual person. So if you have a list of donors that support your ministry, pick one of them and actually write your prayer letter to that one person. It will drastically change how you write your letter. If you think you're talking to churches or think you're talking to supporters, you're going to be at an arm's length, right? But if you're talking to an individual person, there's all of a sudden relationship. You use the word you more often. People love to hear the word you because we like to be appreciated. We like to be talked to. We like the attention, right? So picture that one person and write a story to them. The key is showing, don't tell. This is a common, English 101 kind of thing, but it's very easy to forget. Telling is, I heard footsteps creeping behind me, and it made the whole situation scarier. Showing is, crunching hit my ears from behind, accelerating the already rampant pounding of my heart against my ribs. Which one engages you at a different, deeper level? It's going to be the showing there. What about, I had a great conversation with Tim over dinner, and I loved hearing his stories. Or, I barely touched my food, riveted by Tim. Let me tell you another story, he said. All of a sudden, people, when you show people, their brains figure out that you enjoyed that conversation, that you were scared, that, those things happen. If you show people and let them come to the conclusions, it's much more powerful and it registers deeper in the brain. You have to get rid of those emotion explaining words. So don't say happy or sad or angry or frustrated, excited, giddy, love, anxious, joy. Illustrate those things. How do people express being anxious, right? They might move around in their seat a lot, or they might tap their foot nervously, right? They might shout if they're angry. They might be very short with the way that they talk. Use those kinds of descriptions to convey those emotions and to convey that information. Also, passive versus active. This is really easy to fall into as well. Passive, there were a lot of dead leaves lying on the ground. Active, dead leaves covered the ground. Passive, this year's conference was extremely challenging. Active, this year's conference challenged me. It's shorter, it's more concise, it's also more energetic, right? The other thing that passive voice can do can sometimes obscure, and you'll see this a lot in politics, but I think we as people involved in ministry need to be especially aware of this kind of stuff, right? So the working class was marginalized. African Americans were discriminated against. Women were not treated as equals. Those are all very passive statements, but there's active discrimination happening in all of them, and someone is doing the discrimination, right? And so I think it's important that we don't try to obscure things that are happening by using the passive voice. All right, I also have a little handout that I'm going to make active here that has some really good ministry examples of passive and active voice and how to use that, and how to just kind of edit and rewrite a few things like to improve that. So let's look at this document. So I'm just going to read a little bit. This is a sample prayer letter that I put together. Last month, Jim led a group of 13 pastors in the first TLT module. The pastors were from surrounding villages, and many seemed to enjoy the content of the training very much. TLT continues to grow here with about 10 regional groups and over 100 participants recorded so far. Most groups are progressing well towards a planned August 2014 graduation. One of the great things about TLT is the multiplication factor. Once these groups graduate, they can continue without depending on outside personnel or funding. Anyway, so that first paragraph there. When I'm in a group setting, I actually let people edit and we have a nice discussion, but we're short for time and also technology does limit us a little bit. But right here, one, you need to explain what TLT is. I think that's one of the important things. Don't assume that people know what you're writing about or what you're involved in. I always give the example of when I joined our church, I all of a sudden started getting prayer letters from missionaries. Our church supported them, but I've never heard of these people before. And so I'm getting, maybe they've been on the field for 15 years, but I'm getting their first prayer letter. And if this is what I read, TLT, I have no idea what TLT is, right? So make your content readable for the first time, each time. And, we have this example here of leading a group of 13 pastors and how they enjoyed it very much, but you don't use any descriptions of how you can tell they enjoy it. Show how they enjoyed it. Maybe focus on one pastor story who went through this training and the challenges that his congregation is facing and the action plan that he put together to come up with a good idea for how to have that transformation, right? We have a picture here that's a big kind of group photo. Maybe the faces are too small, too dark. And I have another example here of up on the right column. Joshua is a 14-year-old boy who lives near us, but he reads at a second grade level. His uncle came to Marie this morning asking if she can teach him to read. Marie agreed. This is an indication of the failure of many Uganda's grade schools. There are many needs in this country. Lots of telling, not a whole lot of showing. I want to know more about Joshua. I want to see, if he came to your house, what is your house like? Did he walk up? What are the roads like? Giving those details, those tangible, really engages the reader and helps them picture and feel the emotions that are happening there, right? What are the examples of the education? You make a statement about grade schools and how they're not meeting the needs, but what are the examples that you can give to tangibly just demonstrate that, right? So these are just little things that it's very easy to write a prayer letter like this, but it's almost useless because you could be communicating at a much deeper, more memorable level. All right, when it comes to, we've talked about stories. Now, stories are important. I would say at least have one good story in every prayer letter, whether it's about a little thing or a big thing. Try to figure out what's my story going to be. But then, what are those other things that you can write about? Local culture, language, and customs. So I think there is I have some good examples here. Why do people on motorcycles wear masks? How do people in this culture greet one another? Why do men hold hands in public, but couples don't? Why do people take their shoes off before entering a house? They drink sodas warm here. Why am I the only one sweating in the heat? Why don't they let me practice my French in Paris? What are the cultural things, the things that people back home might not realize about your context, right? Your daily life is unique to them, even though it might be commonplace to you. Talk about a day in the life. So when what does your commute look like? How does your work differ from what office life here might be, right? Walk through kind of the experience of doing ministry in your context. Lists are also a really easy way to put together content. They're also very skimmable, remember? So something like 10 things you miss from back home, or 7 answered prayers, 5 things you're thankful for. Don't forget to include photos and even videos if you feel capable enough to take those. Maybe I should do another webinar on that. Revisit something that you wrote about months ago and give an update on it. Maybe a lesson that God is teaching you. one of the things that stood out to me is, we talked about being authentic and being vulnerable, and how Johanna Veenstra talked about her struggles and things like that. I have a friend who, this is a number of years ago now, but she wrote a blog post titled, "When Do I Give Up?" And she wrote about how she works with leading childbirth class and support group for pregnant women. And so, she did a lot of work organizing all this stuff, and, one or two women have been coming, and that's it. And so she's been asking herself, like, at what point do I just give up? Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And she was honest with her struggles and her, vulnerable with her emotions about that. And a month later, she wrote another blog post titled, "Sometimes all it takes is writing a depressing blog post." And she recounted how she had written that blog post a month prior, saying, "Should I give up?" But after writing that, two women showed up both an hour into the class, and now 6 more people had showed up to the class, and she didn't do anything differently. It's just all of a sudden 8 people were there. 8 women were in this class where only one had come previously. And I think that's the other thing too, is, revisit those things that you wrote about a month ago, be honest with your struggles, ask people to pray for it, and God will do miraculous things to help you. Like when we talk about support, we're not just talking about financial support, but we're also talking about emotional and prayer support. And it can make a big impact in people. And it also engages people. It makes them feel, your ministry personally, when they can kind of struggle along with you. All right, let's talk a little bit about asking. Now, we talked about asking for prayer a little bit, but I also want to talk about asking for financial gifts. I think one of the biggest mistakes when it comes to asking for financial gifts, trying to fundraise, is I picture sitting in a restaurant and being like, if I got a cup of coffee and let's say I took cream and sugar with my coffee, if I just sat there saying, "Oh, I wish this coffee was sweeter," or just tried to make kind of like sad faces about my black cup of coffee, which I never would personally, you're not going to get that sugar and cream. But if you just ask the server, "Can I get a cream and sugar for my coffee?" They'll say, "Oh, sure, no problem," right? They need to be asked. And the same way our supporters and our donors and our churches need to be asked, right? I have friends who, we're good friends, but one of the things that I make it a point to do is saying, "Hey, would you like to go out with me to, grab a cup of coffee and, hang out a little bit?" And they always say yes. And oftentimes they'll say, "Oh, really? Thanks for asking." I never find the time to be able to do this, but because you asked me, I actually am glad that we did this. And the same is true about our donors and our supporters. They want to help you. They want to support you. All you need to do is ask. And when you ask, actually say the word "you." Say, "Will you please consider a gift to my ministry, to this project," to something like that, right? Make the ask, direct it at the person, not "we need this support." Don't make it a passive act, make it an active ask. Be honest, be vulnerable about your needs. If you have a fundraising goal and you are really worried about whether or not you're going to meet it, let people know that you're worried that you're going to meet it. Don't cry wolf, but be honest, be genuine about it. Provide them a problem to solve, saying, "Hey, this thing is happening. These people's lives are, people are struggling with this, and our ministry is to help them transform into a much more fulfilling life. Will you help us do that, please, by donating?" Be specific. Tell them what you need. Common mistakes. When I sit down with missionaries, I often find these things. So giving an itinerary of the past 2 months, people sit down and they say, "Okay, I wrote back in October. What's happened since October?" Don't do that. No one needs a calendar of the events of your life. No one needs to know that you're busy. Oftentimes, as people involved in ministry, we want to say, look, you're supporting my ministry, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. But we rarely talk about what God is doing in people's lives, and that's really what we're here to be involved in, right? And so one story of transformation goes 10 times further than, I led this training, and then we went to this place, and we met with these people, and we had a really great retreat where we, grew spiritually, and we did, talk about one thing deeply and well. Tell a story of transformation well, and that will illustrate to people and connect with them at a much deeper level than what you've been doing for the past 2 months. In a 2-month period, you should hopefully be able to collect one story that you could share. And then, sure, use the back page to share some family updates, some interesting cultural tidbits, a day in the life, something like that, right? Point 3 there, trying to cram it all in. Don't try to make people understand every aspect of your ministry. Give them little vignettes that really illustrate what you're all about. And don't use those postage stamp photos. Storytelling is what it's all about, and it really does make things memorable, make things impactful. And if you can present that story in a visually appealing way, then your prayer letters are going to be 100% better. I have some things to avoid here, but I want to make sure we have at least a little bit of time for Q&A, so I will include these in a handout after our prayer letter today, after our webinar today. We are all storytellers. We all live in a network of stories. There isn't a stronger connection between people than storytelling. So, I want to open it up for any questions. If you have things you want to email me after the fact too, this will be available for review in recording, but what questions do you have? I know we have one from Lisa that was, she's already left us, I believe, but I would say that if you don't feel like you have a story to tell, you need to change your definition of what a story is, right? So who are those people that you can notice a difference in some aspect of their life, and talk about how God is working in their life, and look for those things and really dig deep into them.